Welcome to Unlocking Passion, the Women's Edit. Let's begin with a new story. Sometimes, quiet lives are also the loudest cries for change. Hillary Im, a retired teacher from Chicago, had spent her entire life relying on order. School, rules, and structure were her anchor, her safe harbor in an unpredictable world. Her career in public service was flawless, her reliability legendary, and her control over her own life unshakable. However, after the death of her husband 5 years ago, she was left with nothing but a house in Chicago that was far too empty and a deep, almost unbearable void in her soul. She had no children and never remarried. The days were long, the evenings silent, filled with the piercing question of purpose. She carried a great deal of responsibility, but secretly, deep inside, she was lonely. It was a loneliness that wrapped around her like a cold coat. Over the years, this coldness had seeped so deeply into her bones that she hardly noticed it until a thought flashed through her mind that would change everything, a longing for one last great emotion. Then a thought suddenly opened up, a delicate glimmer of hope. She had inherited $90,000 from her aunt. This sum gave her not only financial security, but also an unexpected freedom. Perhaps it is not too late for a new life, an inner voice whispered to her. A new door seemed to open, a window to a world that lay beyond her well-ordered existence. She yearned to no longer just function, but to live again, to feel, to venture into an adventure before time finally ran out. The digital world, which she had long avoided, became her place of escape. In a Facebook group called Cultural Exchange and Hospitality, she looked for a hint of connection, for a spark of joy that could make her own heart glow again. She did not know that this single click would drag her into an abyss from which there was almost no escape. The screen became a window into a promising world that she could not have imagined in her wildest dreams. It was a place where she was finally allowed to be the woman she had hidden behind all the rules and duties. If this case has already piqued your interest, then please subscribe to the channel. It is going to get much darker. This story shows how blinding the longing for love can be and how quickly life can turn into a nightmare. It began harmlessly, as so many stories take their fatal beginning. Hillary had posted a vacation photo, a shot of the ocean that reflected her longing for vastness. A young man commented on it. His words fell on her soul like warm rain on parched land. "You look like a strong woman," he wrote. His name was Sami B., 25 years old, from Tunis, Tunisia, allegedly an architect who dreamed of love in America. His words were a melody that echoed in her ears, a promise she had not heard since the death of her husband. Hillary replied out of politeness, or so she told herself. But messages followed, then video calls that felt like flattery to her soul. Sami was charming and polite. His eyes radiated a warmth that seemed to drive away her inner coldness. He was always respectful, never pushy. He said sentences that hit exactly her deepest, unspoken longings. "I love older women. They know what they want. They have a depth that younger people lack." Hillary did not say it out loud, but inside she felt seen, desired, and understood for the first time in years. Every message from Sami was like an elixir that made her self-esteem bloom. It was a promise that she was not yet written off, that life still held something beautiful for her. The pain of loneliness, which she had suppressed for so long, gave way to an excited expectation, a feeling of youth and romance that she had long thought lost. She was ready to lose herself in this dream because it was so much more beautiful than her empty reality. Every video call was like a window into a world she no longer had to just dream about. She felt her heart find a rhythm that felt alive, a dance of hope and the irrepressible desire to finally love and be loved again. The hours passed as if in flight, filled with his stories, his laughter, and his promises. She ignored the quiet doubts that her mind still whispered because her heart cried louder for this new, intoxicating affection. The nightly conversations, which stretched across time zones, became her anchor. She told him things she had never confided in anyone before. The silent evenings, the empty rooms, the fear of aging. Sami listened, validated, and understood. He painted pictures of traveling together, of a life full of laughter and adventure that seemed possible only with her. Hillary, who had always been so rational and controlled, let herself be carried away by this emotional flood because it promised what she longed for most, an end to loneliness and the feeling of being the most important person to someone again. After 3 months of daily communication, during which Sami had become the center of her universe, he confessed his love to her. "I want to spend my life with you in the United States," he whispered in a video call, his eyes full of supposed affection. "But it is difficult. Visa problems, you know." He spoke of bureaucratic hurdles, of his longing for a life together that was only possible with her help. He suggested that she should invite him officially with a financial sponsorship. He said that was the only way, that it would be the proof of her love. His words were like a warm hug that simultaneously placed an invisible chain around her soul. The idea of having him in her life forever was so intoxicating that all caution faded into the background. Hillary felt a sting of uncertainty, but the overwhelming longing for closeness and the promise of a shared future were stronger. She said yes. She wanted to help him, wanted to remove the obstacle between them. She transferred money for documents, for alleged fees that kept appearing and becoming more urgent. More than $6,000 flowed into accounts whose names she hardly knew. Every amount transferred was an act of trust, an investment in her new happiness, a proof of her love. The fear of disappointing him, the worry that this dream could burst, weighed heavier than any reason. She convinced herself that these expenses were necessary to prove her love to him, to secure their common future. This was the moment when love became a weapon turned against her, forged from her deepest longing for affection and security. The phone calls with her bank became shorter, her explanations to the advisors more evasive. She felt an invisible wall rising between her and the outside world, a wall made of secrets and unanswered questions. But the longing for Sami's recognition was a powerful motor that kept driving her forward, suppressing every doubt. She imagined how he would finally be with her, how the void in her house would be filled with life. That was the price she was willing to pay to get the happiness that had been denied to her for so long. Every dollar that disappeared from her account was another puzzle piece in the picture that Sami painted for her of their common future. The days until Sami's arrival in Chicago were a torment of impatience and anticipation for Hillary. She cleaned the large house, bought his favorite foods, and imagined what her new life with him would look like. Every chair, every pillow, every plate seemed to be waiting for his arrival. She hardly slept, her thoughts racing, filled with images of a happy future. The anticipation was so intense that it almost hurt. When he finally stood at the airport with a single bag and the brightest smile she had ever seen, the world seemed perfect. He was polite, charming, and flattered her with words. But something was different. A quiet, barely tangible distance. Reality hit her like a cold gust of wind, barely noticeable but unmistakable. His smile did not quite reach his eyes, and the touch of his hand was fleeting, almost like a duty. An icy breath of disappointment brushed her heart, but she immediately pushed it aside. He preferred to sleep on the couch, saying he was tired from the flight, from the journey, from the stress. Hillary understood. This must all be overwhelming for him. She tried to meet his distance with even more affection and understanding. She brought him tea, covered him with a blanket, and spoke soothingly to him. She tried to alleviate his supposed exhaustion, but the initial warmth gave way to a creeping coldness. His glances darted through the room, always searching, never really with her. Reality knocked softly at the door of her heart, but Hillary refused to open it. She clung to the illusion, to the promise he had given her, even when his behavior spoke a different language. The glow in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet uncertainty. The initial euphoria gave way to a feeling of anxiety that she could not categorize. She felt that something was wrong. But she pushed the thoughts aside, not wanting to destroy the beautiful facade she had so painstakingly built. The nights became longer, the conversations shorter. He withdrew, both physically and emotionally, and Hillary felt an icy void spreading in her heart that she knew all too well. Every time she tried to take his hand, he pulled it away with an excuse that sounded increasingly implausible. The silence in her large house, which she had tried so desperately to fill, now became a witness to her growing fear. She was no longer lonely, she was trapped in a togetherness that felt colder than any loneliness before. The hope that had lured her to Chicago began to slowly turn into a nightmare. After 6 weeks in Chicago, Sami changed. The subtle signs turned into open control. He changed her Wi-Fi passwords, claiming it was for safety. The house she once knew as her safe harbor became a place where every digital connection was monitored. He wanted to organize her banking app for the residency application, claiming it was necessary for his permit. He said he needed a new jacket, a phone, something for his family. Within 6 weeks, Hillary recorded over $11,000 in expenses, leaving her account for things Sami suddenly needed. She began to doubt. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Every cent that disappeared from her account was a stab in her heart. But the fear of losing Sami weighed heavier than any financial concern. She was in a whirlpool of fear and guilt, from which there seemed to be no escape. He countered her quiet concerns with sharp words. "If you don't trust me, why did you bring me here? I thought you loved me unconditionally." His voice was cold, his gaze icy. The manipulation was perfidious. He played on her greatest fear. The fear of having made the wrong decision, the fear of being alone again, the fear of not being enough. Hillary, who had always been so controlled, slowly lost control over her own life. Her friends in Chicago tried to reach her, but Sami blocked them, claiming they were jealous or would not understand their relationship. She was isolated, trapped in her own house, which became a prison whose walls consisted of lies and financial dependence. The pressure he exerted on her was stifling. She felt her own personality crumbling under his influence, her self-confidence vanishing and being replaced by a constant fear of his anger. Every day was a struggle for survival, an attempt to meet his expectations so as not to lose the last spark of his supposed affection. The nights became a torment because that was when he would start talking on the phone in Arabic, his voice hushed but excited. She did not understand a word, but the tone of voice frightened her, making her tremble in bed while an invisible veil of fear settled over her. The coldness he radiated was more piercing than any winter air, an icy grip on her soul. She hardly dared to leave the house anymore because Sami always found a reason why she should stay home. The city was too dangerous for a woman of her age, her clothes were not appropriate, or simply he needed her with him. The feeling of being caught in a net that was tightening more and more was crushing. Her breath became shallower, her smile disappeared completely. She was no longer the controlled teacher, but a shadow of herself, trapped in fear of a man she had once blindly trusted. The pressure became unbearable. Sami pushed her. "If we get married, everything will be easier. Then I will get my residency permit. Then we will truly be a family." Hillary initially refused. Her mind screamed for escape, but her heart was caught in the web of manipulation. But Sami did not give up. Gentle pressure gave way to tears, accusations, and playing with her fear of losing him. "I gave up everything for you," he pleaded. "Do you want to leave me in the lurch now? After everything we shared, after all my sacrifices for you. I am here alone in a foreign country and you are my only refuge." His words hit her in her deepest empathy, playing on her sense of duty and her loneliness. She said yes. She said yes to a wedding she didn't really want, driven by desperation and the desperate hope that marriage would change everything, that she could then truly trust him. The walk to the registry office was a gauntlet through her own inner doubts. Every step felt like lead, as if she were marrying off not just him, but her own freedom. Yet the hope that everything would be fine after the wedding, that his distance would vanish and his love would become real, was the last spark she clung to. Even before the ceremony, blind with love and trapped in his lie, she wrote a new will. He was now her future. All her savings, her house, everything was to belong to him in the event of her death. In this act of devotion, which was supposed to feel like the greatest declaration of love, she sealed her own fate. The wedding was not a celebration of love, but a triumph of manipulation, a silent victory for Sami, who had conquered her soul piece by piece. The wedding rings glistened on their fingers, a symbol of connection that would, however, settle like an invisible chain around her soul. She felt as if she were in a dream, a bad dream from which she could not wake up, while the signature under the will sealed her fate like a last drop of ink. The wedding day should have been the most beautiful day of her life. But it felt like a funeral, the funeral of her own freedom and herself. She smiled for the photos, but her inside screamed. The champagne tasted bitter, the congratulations were just a noise. She knew she had made a decision she could not undo, and a sense of hopelessness settled like a heavy veil over her heart. 2 days after the wedding, he simply disappeared without a word, without a message. The silence in the house was stifling, louder than any noise. His phone was off. Her bank account, which he had allegedly organized, was emptied. He had used her credit card for flights, for expensive electronics, for cash he had withdrawn. Almost $35,000 was gone. Everything that was left of the inheritance, everything she had saved over the years, was gone like a bad dream. Reality hit Hillary with a force that took her breath away. The illusion shattered brutally, and what remained was a woman whose heart was broken, whose soul was shattered, and whose trust was destroyed forever. The shock was physically palpable. She fell to the floor, unable to cry, unable to scream. The tears she had held back for so long now flowed unchecked, a river of despair and unbearable pain. She had been used, ruthlessly exploited, betrayed by the man to whom she had given everything. Anger mixed with the shame of the deep, piercing realization of having been so blind. She had stepped into a trap she had helped create herself. It was a prison whose bars were forged from her own longings. The loss of the money was a blow, but the loss of her dignity and her self-esteem was infinitely more painful. She had not only been betrayed, she had also bled out internally, an empty shell of herself. The shame ate deep into her innermost being, a cold, sticky mass that threatened to suffocate her. Every look in the mirror showed her only the image of an old, betrayed woman whose dreams had turned to ash. The world around her seemed to spin while she lay motionless on the floor, caught in a shock that paralyzed her senses. The silence of the house, which had once promised security, now became an echo of her own despair. The realization that she had lost not only her money but also a part of her soul was a burning pain that ran through every fiber of her being. She was a ruin, a wreck left over from a storm that had raged under the guise of love. Despair threatened to swallow her, a vortex pulling her deeper and deeper into the darkness. With the last of her strength, Hillary found her way to the police. Every step was a torment because the shame and pain clung to her like a second skin. But what she had to tell was a story the investigators knew all too well and which was legally difficult to grasp. These were voluntary payments, joint accounts, and there was hardly any evidence of fraud when the victims acted out of love. She learned the cruel truth. Sami had already had similar stories with other women, using other names, in Belgium and France. He was a master of disguise, a systematic marriage swindler who exploited the longings of older, single women. Every new piece of information was another stab in her already torn heart, a proof of the cold-bloodedness and extent of his machinations. The realization that she was just another cog in his perfidious system was unbearable. The realization that she was just another link in a long chain of victims did not make the pain smaller, but deeper and more systemic. He was long gone, back in Tunis, with a new profile and a new target. Justice was powerless, trapped in the narrow limits of legislation that often does not recognize such emotional manipulation as fraud. The injustice burned in Hillary, a hot, angry flame that mixed with deep shame. The thought that Sami would continue his mischief, that more women could fall victim to his perfidious lies, was unbearable. She had not only lost her inheritance, but also part of her faith in the good in people. The shadow of betrayal fell on everything she had once held to be true. The tears she tried so desperately to suppress burned on her skin. She felt helpless, powerless, trapped in a system that could not protect her. The struggle for justice seemed hopeless, a desperate cry in the void. The anger she felt was a last desperate attempt to gain the upper hand. But it quickly evaporated in the bitter realization of her own impotence. Justice, which had once been the symbol of order and fairness, now appeared to her as an impenetrable labyrinth in which victims like her were lost. The hope for restitution vanished with every new piece of information, with every shrug of the shoulders from the authorities. She was alone, not only with her pain but also with the injustice that had happened to her. Today Hillary lives in seclusion. The large house in Chicago, which had once been so promising, now felt like a grave. She has downsized her apartment and seeks comfort in volunteer work, in silent service. But the peace is deceptive. The wounds are deep, the scars invisible. She is in therapy, a laborious way back, step by step, to rebuild trust in herself and in the world. Every day is a battle against the demons of the past, a slow relearning of trust in herself and in the world. The fear of being betrayed or manipulated again sits deep, but a spark of strength flickers within her, driving her forward. In an interview she dared to give after a long time, she found her voice again. Her words, quiet but clear, testified to her deep pain and her new bitter realization. "I thought I was too smart for something like that," she said. "I was so sensible, so controlled." But love is not a question of intelligence, it is a question of longing. She had longed for love, for a new beginning, for a feeling of being young and desired again. And Sami had ruthlessly exploited that longing. This story is a deep drama about emotional dependence, shame, and the silent destruction caused by lies. It shows that love scamming is not the result of naivety, but often the devastating consequence of deep longing, abused trust, and the deeply human desire to be needed and to find a true connection. Some perpetrators do not say, "I am taking advantage of you." They say, "I love you," while meaning, "I need your passport." This story shows that sometimes the greatest crime is not the one that begins with noise and violence, but the one that grows in the shadows while the world looks away. The search for answers is often only the beginning of a much larger, darker truth. It is a warning that the invisible wounds of the soul are often the deepest, and that the temptations of loneliness can sometimes become the most dangerous traps. This documentary is a call to look, to listen, and to understand how subtle and destructive psychological manipulation can be. It is a voice for all those who have remained silent, and a warning to all those who long, so that such tragedies do not repeat themselves. If this story moves you, or you would like to share your thoughts on it, please feel free to write to us in the comments. I read everything. Because sometimes change begins not with justice, but with listening.